The woman in black had attended 17 funerals in 3 years, and from each grave she took a single flower before the dirt was thrown, pressing it carefully between the pages of her late grandmother's Bible. Delilah Graves stood at the edge of Challis, Idaho, watching the sun bleed orange across the Salmon River Valley in the summer of 1882. Her fingers stained with pollen and grief, her heart a pressed flower itself, flat and colorless and perfectly preserved in sorrow. The mining town sprawled below her vantage point on the hillside, all wooden buildings and false fronts, dust and dreams of silver striking it rich. She had come here 2 years ago with her father, a mining engineer who promised her a fresh start after her mother's death. Instead, she found more death. Her father killed in a cave in 6 months after their arrival. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, dead of fever. The saloon girl who had been kind to her, shot by a jealous lover. The preacher's son, thrown from a horse. The list grew longer, and with each funeral, Delilah pressed another flower, another memory, another reason to believe that death was the only constant in this unforgiving land. She made her living now as a seamstress, her needle pulling thread through fabric in the small room above the general store, her hands steady even as her heart remained numb. The townspeople whispered about her, the girl who only wore black, the girl who never smiled, the girl who collected dead flowers like other women collected ribbons. They did not understand that she was building a cathedral of remembrance, that each pressed petal was a prayer for the departed, that her mourning was the only love she had left to give. Delilah turned from the sunset and walked back down the hill, her black skirts gathering dust, her bonnet shading a face that had forgotten the shape of joy. She was 22 years old and felt ancient. Tomorrow, there would be another funeral. Old Thomas Granger, who ran the livery stable, dead of heart failure. She already knew which flower she would take. The yellow rose someone had placed on his coffin. Yellow for friendship, for the few kind words he had spoken to her about her father. She did not know that tomorrow would also bring Quentin Quinn into her life. A cowboy with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the Idaho sky. Riding a paint horse and carrying in his saddlebag a strange and stubborn hope that love was still possible in a world that seemed determined to prove otherwise. The funeral took place at 10 in the morning, the July heat already pressing down on the small cemetery outside town. Delilah stood apart from the other mourners, as she always did, waiting for the service to end. Reverend Matthew spoke about eternal rest and God's mercy, words that slid off Delilah like water off oilcloth. She had heard them too many times. They meant nothing anymore. When the last prayer was said and people began to drift away, Delilah approached the coffin. She had learned to move quickly, to take her flower before anyone could stop her or ask questions. But today, as she reached for the yellow rose, another hand was already there. She looked up into a face she did not recognize. A man, tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that held both kindness and sadness. He was dressed like a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, but he had removed his hat for the funeral. In his hand, he held the yellow rose she had meant to take. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Were you wanting this?" Delilah stared at him, thrown off balance. No one had ever interfered with her ritual before. "I take one flower," she said, "from every funeral, to press and keep." He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt something strange happen beneath her ribs, as if her pressed flower heart had trembled slightly. "Why?" he asked, not unkindly. "To remember," she said. "So they are not forgotten." He held out the rose to her. "That is a fine reason," he said. "Tom Granger was a good man. He deserves remembering." She took the flower from him, careful not to let their fingers touch, and nodded once. Did you know him? He taught me about horses when I was a boy, the man said. I have been working cattle ranches down in Nevada for the past 8 years, but I heard he passed, and I came back to pay respects. My name is Quentin Quinn. Delilah Graves. Graves, he repeated, and something flickered in his eyes. That is a hard name to carry. It fits, she said, and turned to leave, but he called after her. Miss Graves, if you are collecting memories of the dead, perhaps you should also collect some of the living. It seems a shame to only remember people after they are gone. She stopped but did not turn around. Her throat felt tight. The living leave too, she said, or they die. It is all the same in the end. Maybe, Quentin said, but the middle part, the living part, that matters too. Delilah walked away without answering, but his words followed her like shadows. She climbed the stairs to her small room above the general store, where the walls were lined with her pressed flowers, each one labeled with a name and date. She opened her grandmother's Bible to a blank page and placed the yellow rose inside, then weighted it down with a heavy book. In a week, it would be flat and dry, preserved forever just like all the others. She tried to settle into her sewing, a dress that needed hemming for the banker's wife, but her hands were restless, her mind elsewhere. She kept thinking about Quentin Quinn's words. The living part matters too. It was a dangerous thought, the kind that could crack open the careful shell she had built around herself. She had learned not to hope, not to want, not to expect anything from life except more loss. It was safer that way, cleaner. But that night, lying in her narrow bed, she dreamed not of funerals but of flowers growing wild in a mountain meadow, bright and alive and reaching toward the sun. The next morning, she found him waiting outside the general store when she came down to buy thread. He was leaning against the hitching post, his paint horse beside him, and in his hand was a bouquet of wildflowers, vivid and fresh, dirt still clinging to their roots. "Good morning, Miss Graves," he said, straightening when he saw her. "I brought you something." Delilah stared at the flowers. Purple lupines, red Indian paintbrush, white columbines. They were beautiful and entirely out of place in her world of pressed petals and funeral wreaths. "Why?" she asked. "You said you collect flowers to remember the dead," Quentin said. "I thought maybe you deserved some flowers just for being alive." She did not reach for them. "I do not need flowers." "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I needed to bring them to you. After yesterday, after meeting you at that funeral, I could not stop thinking about a woman who only takes flowers from graves. It seemed to me like the saddest thing I ever heard, and I have heard plenty of sad things." "You do not know me," Delilah said, her voice sharper than she intended. "You do not know anything about my life." "You are right," Quentin said, "but I would like to if you would let me." "Why?" she asked again, genuinely bewildered. "Why would you want to know someone like me?" He smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard lines that years of outdoor work had carved there. "Because yesterday at that funeral, you were the only person there who seemed to really care that Tom Granger was gone. Everyone else was just going through the motions. But you were there to make sure he was remembered. That tells me you have a big heart, even if you keep it locked up tight." Delilah felt something dangerous rising in her chest. Tears, maybe, or anger, or some feeling she had forbidden herself for so long she could not even name it. "I have to go," she said, pushing past him toward the general store, but he called after her again, his voice carrying in the morning air. "I will be at the Salmon River this afternoon near the Cottonwood Grove. If you change your mind about the flowers or about anything else, I will be there." She did not answer, did not look back, but as she stood inside the general store pretending to examine spools of thread, she could see him through the window, standing in the street with his bouquet of living flowers, before he finally climbed onto his horse and rode away. The day crawled by. Delilah sewed mechanically, her needle pulling through fabric while her mind pulled through the strange encounter. She told herself she would not go to the river. She told herself Quentin Quinn was just a drifter, a cowboy passing through, and getting involved with him would only lead to more loss. She told herself the pressed flowers in her Bible were enough, that remembering the dead was a safer occupation than risking her heart on the living. But when the afternoon sun slanted golden through her window, she found herself setting down her sewing, removing her apron, and walking toward the river. The cottonwood grove was a green oasis in the dry landscape, the trees offering shade and the sound of rustling leaves like whispered secrets. The Salmon River ran fast and cold with mountain snowmelt, and beside it, Quentin Quinn sat on a flat rock, still holding the bouquet of wildflowers. He looked up when he heard her approach, and his face lit with such genuine pleasure that Delilah felt her careful defenses crack a little wider. "You came," he said. "I do not know why," she admitted, stopping a few feet away. "Maybe because you are tired of only collecting dead things," he suggested gently. He held out the flowers again. "These ones are still alive, still growing. See, they have roots. You could plant them somewhere, watch them bloom." Delilah looked at the flowers, at the dirt clinging to their roots, at the way the petals moved slightly in the breeze. They were so alive it almost hurt to look at them. "I do not have anywhere to plant them," she said. "Then we will find a place," Quentin said. "Or you could keep them in water for a while, let them brighten up your room before they fade." "Everything fades," Delilah said. "Everything dies." "Yes," Quentin agreed, "but before that everything lives, and the living is the important part. You can press those flowers later if you want, save them as a memory. But first, let them live. Let yourself enjoy them while they are still blooming." She took the flowers from him then, her fingers brushing his, and the touch sent a shock through her system, a reminder that she too was still alive, still capable of feeling. The flowers were heavier than she expected, substantial in a way pressed flowers never were. She brought them to her face and breathed in their scent, wild and sweet and utterly different from the funeral roses and lilies she usually handled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Will you sit?" Quentin asked, gesturing to the rock beside him. "Just for a while, talk with me." Delilah hesitated, but the part of her that had dreamed of meadows full of living flowers won out over the part that wanted to run back to safety. She sat, carefully arranging her black skirts, the bouquet in her lap. "Tell me about the pressed flowers," Quentin said. "How many do you have?" 17, Delilah said. "One for each funeral I have attended since my mother died." "Your mother," Quentin said softly. "I am sorry. Was that long ago?" 3 years, Delilah said. "In Oregon. My father brought me here afterward, hoping the change would help, but he died too in the mines." "And then others. The town doctor said I have terrible luck being around so much death." "That is foolish," Quentin said firmly. "You do not cause death just by being near it. This is the West. People die. It is hard living out here." "I know that in my head," Delilah said. "But sometimes I wonder if I am cursed, if everyone I care about is destined to leave." "Is that why you only collect dead flowers?" Quentin asked. "Because you are afraid living things will die?" The question was so direct, so clear that Delilah felt exposed. "Maybe," she admitted. "When things are already dead, already pressed and preserved, they cannot hurt you anymore. They cannot leave because they are already gone." Quentin was quiet for a moment, watching the river flow past. Then he said, "After my father died when I was 15, I spent 3 years barely talking to anyone. I worked cattle ranches, slept under stars, kept myself separate from people. I thought if I did not let anyone matter to me, then I could not be hurt when they left. And you know what I learned?" "What?" Delilah asked, looking at him. "That I was already hurt. he said. That protecting myself from future pain just meant living with the old pain every single day. I was not living at all. I was just existing, going through the motions. It took an old Mexican vaquero named Carlos to snap me out of it. He told me that my father would be ashamed to see me wasting the life he gave me by being afraid to live it. "What did you do?" Delilah asked. "I started letting people in again," Quentin said. "Started making friends, caring about the men I worked with, writing letters to my sister back in Ohio. And yes, some of those people did leave or die. But the time I had with them mattered. The friendship, the connection that was real and good, even if it ended." Delilah looked down at the flowers in her lap. "I do not know if I can do that. I do not know if I remember how." "Then start small," Quentin said. "Start with these flowers. Let them live in your room for a few days. Let yourself enjoy looking at them. That is all. No big risk there." She managed a small smile. "And you? Are you a big risk?" His answering smile was warm. "Maybe, but I am a patient one. I will not push you toward anything you are not ready for. I just think you deserve more than a room full of dead flowers and a heart that has forgotten how to feel." They sat together by the river until the sun began to set, talking in fits and starts about small things. Quentin told her about the ranches he had worked, the cattle drives he had been on, the vast sky of Nevada and the way thunderstorms rolled across the desert. Delilah told him about her sewing, the particular challenge of setting sleeves, the way different fabrics felt under her fingers. They did not talk about death or loss or fear. They talked about living things, present things, and for the first time in years, Delilah felt something in her chest that might have been the beginning of hope. When she finally stood to leave, the bouquet clutched carefully in her hands, Quentin stood too. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "I do not know," Delilah said honestly. "This is all very strange to me." "Tomorrow afternoon," Quentin said. "Same place, same time. If you come, I will be here. If you do not, I will understand, but I will be disappointed." Delilah nodded slowly. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care about me?" Quentin looked at her with those sky-blue eyes, and his voice was serious when he answered. "Because yesterday at that funeral, I saw someone who cares deeply in a world that often does not care at all. And because when you took that flower to press and preserve, I saw someone who understands that every life matters, even in death. That is rare, Miss Graves. That is precious. And I would be a fool not to want to know you better." Delilah walked home with the flowers held against her chest, feeling their life force through the stems, and when she reached her room, she did not press them. Instead, she found an old glass jar, filled it with water from the pump behind the store, and set the flowers in it. She placed the jar on her windowsill where the morning sun would touch them, and for the first time since she had moved into this room, there was color that was not black, life that was not pressed flat and preserved in sorrow. That night, she lay in bed looking at the flowers silhouetted against the starlight, and she thought about Quentin Quinn. She thought about his kindness, his patience, the way he had sat beside her at the river without demanding anything, without pushing, just offering his presence like another kind of gift. She thought about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could care about someone living without being destroyed when they inevitably left. It was a terrifying thought. But it was also, in its own way, thrilling. The next afternoon, she went back to the Cottonwood Grove. Quentin was there, as he had promised, and his smile when he saw her was like sunlight breaking through clouds. This time, he had brought a blanket to sit on and some bread and cheese from the hotel kitchen. "I thought we could have a late lunch," he said. "If that would be all right with you." They sat together in the dappled shade, eating simple food and talking more freely now. Delilah asked him about his family, and he told her about his sister Margaret in Ohio. who had 3 children and a husband who ran a dry goods store, who wrote him long letters full of domestic details that he treasured. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was young, and his father, who had tried his best to raise 2 children alone and succeeded until a farm accident took him too. After he died, Margaret wanted me to come live with her and her husband in Ohio, Quentin said, but I could not do it. I needed space, needed the open range, needed to process my grief somewhere big enough to hold it. So I went west, hired on with a cattle outfit and learned to be a cowboy. Do you regret it? Delilah asked. No, Quentin said. It was what I needed. But lately, I have been thinking it might be time for something different. I am 25 now and I am tired of drifting. I want to put down roots somewhere, build something that lasts. Why did you come back to Challies? Delilah asked. Tom Granger was like a grandfather to me, Quentin said. When my father and I first came through here when I was a boy, Tom let me help around the livery stable. He taught me how to really see horses, how to understand them. He gave me some of the best advice I ever got. When I heard he died, I knew I had to come pay my respects. And I have been thinking lately that Challies might be a good place to settle. The valley here is beautiful, there is good grazing land, and the town is growing with the silver mining. A man could build a life here. Delilah felt her heart skip. Are you saying you are planning to stay? I am considering it, Quentin said, looking at her directly. Especially if I found a reason to stay. The implication hung in the air between them, and Delilah felt panic and hope warring in her chest. You should not make decisions based on me, she said. You barely know me. Then let me get to know you, Quentin said. That is all I am asking. Let me court you properly, Delilah. Let me show you that not everyone leaves, that some people stay. But you might leave, Delilah said, her voice breaking slightly. Or you might die. This is the West. Men die in stupid accidents, get shot, get sick. I cannot go through that again. You could, Quentin said gently. If you had to. You are stronger than you think. But Delilah, you could also choose not to live your whole life afraid of what might happen. Yes, I might die. You might die. Everyone dies eventually. But we are both alive right now today, and we have a choice about how we spend this time we have been given. I have spent it in mourning, Delilah whispered. I know, Quentin said, but you do not have to anymore. You could choose something different. She looked at him, this cowboy who had ridden into her life with living flowers and dangerous hope, and she felt the walls around her heart beginning to crumble. It was terrifying, but it was also a relief, like setting down a burden she had carried too long. All right, she said. You can court me, but slowly. I need to go slowly. Quentin's smile was like dawn breaking. Slowly is perfect, he said. We have time. Over the following weeks, Quentin courted Delilah with a patience and gentleness that gradually thawed her frozen heart. He brought her flowers every few days, always living ones, always with their roots intact. Wildflowers from the mountains, columbines and lupines and Indian paintbrush. A small rose bush in a pot that she could keep on her windowsill. A cutting from a lilac that he said would bloom next spring if she kept it watered. Her room, once a shrine to death with its pressed flowers and black curtains, slowly transformed. The living flowers on the windowsill brought color and life, and she found herself opening the curtains more often, letting in light. She even bought fabric that was not black to make herself a new dress, a dark green that Quentin said brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. They spent their afternoons together by the river, talking about everything and nothing. Quentin told her stories from his years on cattle drives, painting pictures with words of endless grasslands and star-filled skies, of stampedes and river crossings, of the camaraderie among cowboys. Delilah told him about her childhood in Oregon, about learning to sew from her mother, about the dreams she had once had before loss taught her not to dream at all. "What did you want?" Quentin asked one day as they sat watching the river. "Before everything happened, what did you dream about?" Delilah thought back, reaching for memories she had buried. "I wanted a dress shop," she said slowly. "Not just sewing for other people in a back room, but a real shop with my name on it. I wanted to design dresses, beautiful things that made women feel special. I wanted to build something that mattered." "You still could," Quentin said. "I do not have the money to start a shop," Delilah said, "and I do not have the heart for it anymore." "The heart can grow back," Quentin said, "like those flowers with roots. Give it time and the right conditions, and it will bloom again." She smiled at that, a real smile, the kind that felt strange on her face because it had been so long. "You are very persistent with your flower metaphors." "They seem to work," Quentin said, smiling back. "You are smiling more." That was the goal. As summer deepened into August, their courtship deepened too. Quentin found work at a ranch outside town, managing horses and training young stock, which gave him reason to stay in the area. He rented a room at the boarding house and began to build a life in Challies. Delilah watched him put down roots, literally and figuratively, and she found her fear slowly transforming into something else. Not quite trust yet, but the possibility of trust, the willingness to try. One evening, as they walked along the river path with the sunset painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Quentin took her hand. It was the first time he had done more than brush her fingers accidentally, and Delilah felt the touch like electricity. She stiffened instinctively, and he started to pull away, but she held on. "Do not let go," she said quietly. "I am just not used to this." "I will never let go unless you ask me to," Quentin said. They walked hand in hand until full dark, and when he left her at the bottom of the stairs to her room, he lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "Good night, Delilah," he said. "Thank you for another perfect afternoon." "It was perfect, was not it?" she said wonderingly. "I had forgotten that days could be perfect." "They can," Quentin said, "and they will be again." In her room that night, Delilah did something she had not done in 3 years. She opened her grandmother's Bible and looked at her pressed flowers, at the 17 funerals she had memorialized in petals and dates. They were beautiful in their way, preserved perfectly, eternal in their stillness. But they were also dead, finished, complete. She looked at the living flowers on her windowsill, at the way they moved slightly in the night breeze, at how they changed every day, blooming and fading and growing. They were temporary, yes, but they were also alive. And in that moment, Delilah understood what Quentin had been trying to teach her. That life, with all its risk and change and inevitable loss, was still better than the safe preservation of death. She did not throw away her pressed flowers. They were part of her story, part of how she had survived her grief. But she did not add to them anymore. When old Mr. Peterson died the following week, Delilah attended the funeral, but she did not take a flower. Instead, she stood beside Quentin, holding his hand, and remembered the old man by telling Quentin a story about how Mr. Peterson had once helped her father when they first came to town, recommending him to the mine owners. "That is a better memorial than a pressed flower," Quentin said, keeping his kindness alive in memory and story. "You are right," Delilah said, and leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust that made his breath catch. As September arrived and the aspens on the mountainsides began to turn gold, Quentin asked Delilah if she would come out to the ranch where he worked. "I want you to see what I do," he said. "I want you to meet the horses I have been training. They are part of my life, and I want to share that with you." The ranch was an hour's ride from town, and Quentin borrowed a gentle mare for Delilah. She had not ridden much, but she found she enjoyed the rhythm of it, the way the world looked different from horseback. The ranch was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on all sides, the grass still green where irrigation ditches fed it. Quentin introduced her to the ranch owner, a weathered man named Jack Sullivan, who clearly respected Quentin's skill with horses. Then he took her to the corrals where he had been working with a string of young horses, gentling them to saddle and ride her. "This is what I love to do," Quentin said, running his hand along a bay gelding's neck. "Taking a wild thing and showing it that humans can be trusted, that we can be partners instead of predators. It takes patience and time, but when you finally connect with a horse, when they choose to trust you, it is magical." Delilah watched him work with the young horses, his movements calm and sure, his voice low and soothing. She saw the same patience he showed with her reflected in how he handled these animals, never rushing, never forcing, just persistent gentle presence until trust was earned. "You are good at this," she said. "I have had good teachers," Quentin said, "and I have learned that anything worth having requires patience and care, whether it is a horse or—" He paused, looking at her meaningfully, "or a person." That night, riding back to town under a sky full of stars, Delilah said, "I am falling in love with you." Quentin pulled his horse to a stop, and she stopped beside him. In the starlight, his face was full of such joy that it made her breath catch. "Say that again," he said. "I am falling in love with you," Delilah repeated, stronger this time. "I did not think I could any more. I thought that part of me was dead, pressed flat like my flowers. But you brought it back to life. You are bringing me back to life." Quentin dismounted and came to her, helping her down from her horse, and then he pulled her into his arms. "I have been in love with you since the day you explained why you press flowers from funerals," he said. "Since I saw your huge heart hiding behind all that black cloth and grief. I love you, Delilah Graves, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you that love does not have to end in loss." He kissed her then, gentle at first and then deeper, and Delilah felt herself come alive in a way she had not been since her mother died. She felt her heart, that pressed and preserved thing, suddenly bloom like the living flowers he had brought her, unfurling petals and reaching toward light. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Delilah laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so unexpected that Quentin grinned. "What is funny?" he asked. "I just realized I have not laughed in 3 years," Delilah said, "but you make me laugh, you make me feel alive." "Good," Quentin said, "because I intend to make you laugh every day for the rest of our lives, if you will let me." "Is that a proposal?" Delilah asked, her heart racing. "Not yet," Quentin said. "When I propose, it will be proper and romantic, and I will have a ring. This is just me telling you my intentions. I want to marry you, Delilah. I want to build a life with you, but I will wait until you are ready. No rushing." "I am not ready yet," Delilah admitted. "But I think I could be soon. That feels like a miracle." They rode back to town slowly, holding hands across the space between their horses, talking about possibilities. Quentin told her he was saving money to buy land, that he wanted to start his own horse ranch eventually. Delilah told him about her dream of a dress shop, how it was starting to feel possible again. "We could do both," Quentin said. "We could build both dreams, together." In the weeks that followed, Delilah began to truly believe in that future. She started designing dresses again, sketching in the evenings by lamplight, her creativity flowing for the first time in years. Quentin encouraged her, admired her drawings, asked questions about fabrics and techniques. He treated her dreams with the same respect he showed his horses, with patience and genuine interest. The town noticed the change in her. The general store owner commented that she seemed lighter somehow. The banker's wife, when she came to pick up her finished dress, remarked that Delilah looked pretty in her green dress instead of constant black. The Reverend stopped her on the street one Sunday and said he was glad to see her healing. "That young man Quinn is good for you," Reverend Matthews said. "He has brought you back to the living." "He has," Delilah agreed. "He brought me living flowers when all I had was dead ones." October arrived with cold nights and brilliant days, the valley aflame with autumn color. On a Sunday afternoon, Quentin asked Delilah to go for a walk up into the hills above town. They climbed to the same spot where she had once stood watching the sunset 3 months earlier, back when she had been nothing but pressed grief and collected sorrows. The view was magnificent, the valley spread below them in golds and oranges, the river a silver ribbon winding through it all. Quentin had brought a blanket and a picnic, and they sat together eating bread and apples, warm under the afternoon sun. "You remember the first day we really talked?" Quentin asked. "By the river, of course," Delilah said. "You brought me living flowers. You changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Quentin said. "I had been drifting for so long, and then I met you, and suddenly I had a reason to stay in one place. A reason to build instead of just wander." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Delilah's heart began to pound. "I said I would wait until I could propose properly," Quentin said. "With a ring and romance. This is me doing that." "Delilah Graves, you are the strongest, most loving person I have ever met. You taught me that grief can become growth, that pressed flowers can bloom again if given the right conditions. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting, to create beauty in a hard world. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life bringing you living flowers and living love?" He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band with a small garnet, the dark red stone catching the light. "The stone reminded me of a pressed rose," Quentin said. "But set in gold that will last, the way our love will last." Delilah looked at the ring, at this man who had understood her so completely, who had been patient while she learned to live again. She thought about her pressed flowers still in her Bible, still preserved. But she also thought about the living flowers on her windowsill, the ones that brought daily joy even as they bloomed and faded. Both were beautiful. Both mattered. But only one was truly alive. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. Happy tears this time, not the tears of grief she had cried for so long. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Quentin Quinn. You brought me back to life, and I want to spend that life with you." He slipped the ring on her finger, and then he kissed her with all the pent-up passion of months of patient courtship. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, Quentin said, "I have been waiting to do that properly for months." "You can do it whenever you want now," Delilah said. "We are engaged. It is allowed." They sat on that hillside until sunset making plans. They would marry in the spring, they decided. Quentin would continue saving money, and by next year he hoped to have enough to buy land for the horse ranch. Delilah would start seriously planning her dress shop, maybe opening it in a year or two once they were settled. They would build a house together, fill it with living flowers and love, and eventually, they hoped, children. "I want a big family," Quentin said. "I want noise and chaos and life all around us." "I want that too," Delilah said. "I spent so long surrounded by death and silence. I want to fill our home with living things." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Challies. The town was happy for them, this cowboy and the grieving seamstress who had found each other. The banker's wife commissioned Delilah to make her wedding dress, which seemed fitting. Delilah spent the winter designing and sewing the most beautiful dress she had ever made, ivory silk with delicate embroidery, a dress that felt like hope made tangible. Quentin spent the winter working and saving, and by spring he had enough to make an offer on a piece of land 10 miles from town. good grazing with a creek running through it. The day the deal was finalized, he rode into town and swept Delilah up in his arms, spinning her around in the street. "We have land," he said. "We have a place to build our life." They married on a bright May morning in 1883, almost exactly a year after they had met at Tom Granger's funeral. The ceremony was held in the small church in Challis, with half the town attending. Delilah wore her ivory dress and carried a bouquet of living wildflowers, lupines and columbines and Indian paintbrush, the same flowers Quentin had first brought her. She wore her dark hair down under a simple veil, and when she walked down the aisle to where Quentin waited, his face full of love and joy, she felt like she was walking into sunlight after years in shadow. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the way God brings people together in unexpected ways. When it came time for the vows, Quentin's voice was strong and clear. "I promise to love you all the days of my life," he said. "To bring you living flowers and living hope. To build with you a life full of joy and purpose. To be your partner in all things, in laughter and in tears, in plenty and in want. I will never leave you by choice, and I will fill your days with reasons to believe in tomorrow." Delilah's voice shook with emotion as she said her vows. "I promise to love you with a heart that you taught to bloom again, to trust in our future even when I am afraid, to build our dreams together, to create beauty in the world, to choose life over grief every single day. You saved me, Quentin Quinn, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Quentin kissed her, Delilah felt complete in a way she had not since before her mother died. She was not the girl who pressed funeral flowers anymore. She was a woman who chose living things, who chose hope, who chose love. The reception was held in the hotel dining room with music and dancing and food. Delilah danced with her husband, feeling his arms around her, feeling safe and cherished and alive. People congratulated them, wished them well, told them they were perfect together. Later, when the party was winding down, Delilah found herself standing outside with Quentin under the stars. "Are you happy?" he asked her. "I am happier than I ever thought I could be again," she said honestly. "You gave me my life back. You gave me a life worth living," Quentin countered. "We saved each other." They spent their wedding night at the hotel, then in the morning loaded up a wagon with Delilah's belongings and drove out to their land. Quentin had spent the past month building a small cabin, just 2 rooms for now, but sturdy and well-made. It sat near the creek, surrounded by grass and wildflowers, with the mountains rising beyond. "It is not much yet," Quentin said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is ours. And we will build it into something beautiful." "It already is beautiful," Delilah said, looking at the cabin, at the flowers growing wild around it, at the possibilities spreading out in every direction. "It is perfect." They spent the summer building their life together. Quentin worked with the horses, training and selling them, slowly building a reputation for quality work. Delilah set up her sewing in one corner of the cabin and continued taking commissions, saving money toward her dream of a dress shop. In the evenings, they would sit outside and watch the sunset, planning their future, talking and laughing and simply being together. In the fall, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. She told Quentin one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said quietly, Quentin's face transformed with joy. "Truly, are you certain as I can be?" Delilah said. "The baby should come in the spring." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "A new life." "Delilah, do you realize what this means? We are creating life instead of mourning death. We are building our family." "I know," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. I never thought I would have this. I never thought I deserved it. You deserve every happiness, Quentin said fiercely. You deserve the whole world. The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah suffered from sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. But Quentin was endlessly patient, caring for her with the same gentle persistence he showed his horses. He brought her tea and dry toast when she was sick, rubbed her back when it ached, read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but rest. You do not have to do all this, Delilah said one night as he massaged her swollen feet. I want to, Quentin said simply. You are carrying our child. You are doing the hardest work there is. The least I can do is take care of you. Their son was born on a warm April morning in 1884, delivered by the doctor from town with Quentin holding Delilah's hand through the whole ordeal. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Quentin cut the cord with shaking hands and then placed their son in Delilah's arms. He is perfect, Delilah whispered, looking down at the tiny face. He is alive and perfect. What should we name him? Quentin asked, his voice choked with emotion. Delilah thought for a moment. Thomas, she said, after Tom Granger, the man whose funeral brought us together. Thomas Quinn, Quentin said. It is a good, strong name. Tom would have been honored. Baby Thomas thrived, growing strong and healthy through that spring and summer. Delilah found that motherhood came more naturally than she had expected, though she was constantly tired. Quentin was a devoted father, taking the baby whenever Delilah needed rest, walking the floor with him at night when he cried, talking to him about horses and the ranch as if the infant could understand. You are going to love it here, Quentin would tell the baby. Your mother and I built this place for you, for your brothers and sisters who will come someday. You are going to grow up surrounded by living things, by love and hope and beauty. Listening to him, Delilah would feel her heart expand with so much love she thought it might burst. This was what she had been missing during all those years of pressing funeral flowers. This living, breathing, messy, chaotic, beautiful love. This family that grew and changed instead of remaining fixed and preserved. When Thomas was 6 months old and could sit up on his own, Delilah went back to her sewing more seriously. She had continued taking small commissions throughout her pregnancy, but now she began working on her plan for a dress shop in earnest. She designed dresses in the evenings after Thomas went to sleep, sketching elaborate gowns and practical day dresses, imagining the shop she would someday have. Quentin encouraged her, as he always did. When Thomas is a bit older, we will make it happen, he promised. We will build a shop in town, hire someone to help with the sewing so you are not doing it all yourself. You will have the finest dress shop in Idaho. That is a big dream, Delilah said. So was loving again, Quentin pointed out. So was believing in the future. You have already accomplished the impossible. A dress shop is easy compared to that. In the fall of 1885, when Thomas was a year and a half old and toddling around getting into everything, Delilah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to do. Their daughter was born in May of 1886, a tiny perfect girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. What should we name her? Quentin asked, holding his daughter with practiced ease. Rose, Delilah said, for the living flowers you brought me, for the life you gave me. Rose Quinn, Quentin said, smiling down at the baby. Welcome to the world, little one. You have a big brother who is going to drive you crazy and parents who love you more than anything. With 2 small children, life was busy and chaotic in the best way. Thomas was a whirlwind of energy, always underfoot, endlessly curious about everything. Rose was a calmer baby, content to watch the world from Delilah's arms or her father's. The cabin they had built suddenly felt small. So Quentin spent that summer expanding it, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. The horse ranch was thriving now. Quentin had built a solid reputation, and buyers came from all over Idaho and Montana to purchase horses he had trained. The money was good, and by the time Rose turned 1, they had saved enough for Delilah to seriously pursue her dress shop dream. They rented a small building on Challies's Main Street and spent a month fixing it up. Quentin built shelves and a counter while Delilah sewed curtains for the window and arranged fabric bolts attractively. She hired a young woman named Sarah to help with the sewing, and in September of 1887, Delilah's dress shop officially opened. The first customer was the banker's wife, who had worn Delilah's wedding dress at her own wedding years ago. "I have been waiting for this day," she said. "I knew you would do it eventually. You make the most beautiful dresses I have ever seen." The shop was a success from the beginning. Women came from Challies and the surrounding ranches, wanting dresses made by the woman who had survived so much grief and built such a beautiful life. Delilah's designs were elegant but practical, suited to life in the West, and her reputation grew quickly. Quentin was endlessly proud of her. He would ride into town with the children to visit the shop, Thomas now 4 and Rose 2, and he would tell everyone who would listen about his wife's talent and success. "She is the best seamstress in Idaho," he would say, "maybe in the whole West." "You are biased," Delilah would tell him, laughing. "I am honest," Quentin would insist. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Quentin managed the ranch, training horses and slowly expanding their herd. Delilah ran her dress shop, creating beautiful things and building a successful business. They raised their children together, teaching Thomas to ride and helping Rose pick wildflowers, telling them stories in the evenings about their parents' courtship, about pressed flowers and living ones, about how love could heal even the deepest grief. In the summer of 1889, Delilah discovered she was pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was more difficult, her body older now and tired from 2 previous births. But she made it through, and in March of 1890 they welcomed another son, whom they named William. "Our family is complete," Delilah said, holding baby William while Thomas and Rose peered at their new brother with fascination. 3 healthy children, more blessings than I ever dreamed possible." "You deserve every one," Quentin said, kissing her forehead. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." The years passed in a blur of children growing, the ranch expanding, the dress shop thriving. Thomas grew into a lanky boy who loved horses like his father, spending every spare moment in the corrals learning to train and handle the young stock. Rose was artistic like her mother, always drawing or arranging flowers, with an eye for beauty that promised she might follow Delilah into the dress business someday. William was the wild one, always climbing things he should not, always getting into mischief, keeping his parents on their toes. One evening in the fall of 1895, when Thomas was 11, Rose 9, and William 5, the family sat outside watching the sunset. It had become a tradition over the years, this gathering to appreciate the beauty of their valley, to be together before the chaos of getting children to bed. "Tell us the story again," Rose asked. "About how you and Mama met." Delilah and Quentin exchanged smiling glances. Their children never tired of hearing this story, and they never tired of telling it. "Well," Quentin began, "it was at a funeral. I had come back to town to pay respects to an old friend who had died, and I saw your mother taking a flower from the coffin." "The yellow rose," Thomas said. He had heard this story dozens of times. "That is right," Delilah said. "I used to press flowers from every funeral I attended. I had 17 of them, all dried and flat, preserved in my grandmother's Bible." "Why did you do that?" William asked, as he always did. Because I was very sad, Delilah said honestly. My mother had died, and then my father, and then other people I cared about. I thought that if I pressed the flowers, if I preserved them, I could hold on to the people I had lost. But really, I was just holding on to my grief. And then Papa brought you living flowers, Rose said, smiling. He did, Delilah said, looking at her husband with all the love of their years together shining in her eyes. He brought me wildflowers with their roots still attached, and he told me that living things mattered too, that I should not just remember the dead but celebrate the living. I fell in love with your mother the moment I saw her caring so much about remembering people, Quentin said. She had such a big heart, even though she was trying to protect it. I knew I wanted to spend my life showing her that love was worth the risk. And was it worth it, Mama? Thomas asked. Delilah looked at her husband, at her 3 beautiful children, at the ranch they had built together, at the life they had created from grief and hope and living flowers. It was worth everything, she said. Your father saved my life by teaching me to live again. We saved each other, Quentin corrected, as he always did. We built this life together. That night, after the children were asleep, Delilah and Quentin sat together on the porch of their now substantial house. They had added onto it several times over the years, and it was comfortable and beautiful, filled with living flowers in vases and children's drawings on the walls and all the accumulated love of a growing family. You ever look at your pressed flowers anymore? Quentin asked. Sometimes, Delilah said. They are still in my grandmother's Bible up on the shelf. I do not regret preserving them. They are part of my story, part of how I survived, but I am glad they are all I have. I am glad there are no more after that. No more funerals, Quentin asked. Oh, there have been funerals, Delilah said. But I do not press flowers from them anymore. I honor the dead in other ways now. I tell stories about them, I remember their kindnesses, I live my life in a way that would make them proud. The pressed flowers were beautiful, but they were just symbols. Real remembrance happens in how we live, not in what we preserve. You have become very wise, Quentin said, pulling her close. You taught me, Delilah said. You taught me everything that matters, how to hope again, how to love again, how to choose life over grief. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. After a while, Quentin said, I have been thinking about expanding the horse operation again. Maybe bringing in some breeding stock from California, building up a line of really good ranch horses. That sounds wonderful, Delilah said. And I have been thinking about expanding the dress shop, maybe opening a second location in Salmon. Sarah could run the Challies shop while I oversee both. Look at us, Quentin said, smiling. Still dreaming, still building. I love that about us. We learned how to dream together, Delilah said. You taught me that dreams do not always die. Sometimes they just wait for the right conditions to bloom. As the years continued to pass, Delilah and Quentin's life continued to grow and flourish. The horse ranch became one of the most respected in Idaho, known for well-trained stock and honest dealing. The dress shop expanded to 2 locations, then 3, and Delilah trained a whole generation of seamstresses in her techniques. Their children grew into capable, loving adults who carried forward their parents' lessons about choosing life and hope over grief and fear. Thomas became a horse trainer like his father, eventually taking over the ranch operations. Rose opened her own dress shop in Boise, building on her mother's reputation. William, the wild child, became a veterinarian, studying in the East, and then returning to Idaho to care for the animals of the valley. In the spring of 1910, Delilah and Quentin celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. They were in their late 40s now, their dark hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with years of laughter and hard work and living fully. Their children were grown, with families of their own beginning. Grandchildren were arriving, new generations to carry forward the legacy of living love. On their anniversary, Quentin took Delilah back to the cottonwood grove by the Salmon River, where he had first given her living flowers so many years ago. The trees were larger now. The river still ran cold and fast, but the place was essentially unchanged. "Do you remember sitting here that first day?" Quentin asked as they settled onto a blanket he had brought. "I remember everything," Delilah said. "I remember being so scared, so certain that letting you in would only lead to more loss. But you were patient. You waited for me to be ready." "You were worth waiting for," Quentin said. "You are worth everything." He reached into his bag and pulled out a bouquet of wildflowers, just like the ones he had brought her that first day. Lupines and columbines and Indian paintbrush, with dirt still clinging to their roots. "Living flowers," Delilah said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "After all these years, you still bring me living flowers." "I always will," Quentin said. "As long as I am alive, I will bring you reminders to choose life, to choose hope, to choose love. You changed my world, Delilah Quinn. You made everything better just by being in it." "We changed each other's worlds," Delilah said, taking the flowers and breathing in their wild, sweet scent. "We built a life together that neither of us could have built alone." They sat by the river until sunset, talking about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and the dress shops, about all the dreams they had accomplished and the new dreams they were forming. Even in middle age, they were still looking forward, still building, still growing together. "I want to write down our story," Delilah said suddenly, "for our grandchildren and their children after them, so they know that even in the hardest times, even in the deepest grief, love can still bloom, that living things are worth the risk." "That is a beautiful idea," Quentin said. "Though you should probably leave out the part where I was hopelessly smitten from the moment I saw you and acted like a lovesick fool." Delilah laughed, the sound bright and free. "That is my favorite part of the story. That is the part where everything changed." In the years that followed, Delilah did write their story down, filling page after page with the tale of pressed flowers and living ones, of grief transformed into joy, of a cowboy who brought hope to a woman who had forgotten how to dream. She wrote about the 17 funerals, about each pressed flower and what it meant. But mostly she wrote about the living flowers, about choosing life, about building something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The written story became a treasure in the Quinn family, passed down through generations, a reminder that love and hope were always possible, even in the hardest times. Their grandchildren would read it and marvel at how their grandmother had survived such grief. Their great-grandchildren would read it and understand that strength came not from avoiding pain, but from choosing to live fully despite it. Delilah and Quentin lived long, full lives together. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1933, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a vast family tree that had grown from the joining of two wounded hearts. They were old now, their bodies slowed by age, but their love was as vibrant as ever. Still blooming like the living flowers, Quentin continued to bring Delilah until the very end. When Quentin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Delilah grieved him deeply. But she did not press flowers from his funeral. Instead, she planted a garden at his grave, filling it with all the wildflowers he had ever brought her. Lupines and columbines and Indian paintbrush, roses and lilacs and every living thing that had symbolized their love. The garden bloomed every spring, a living memorial more powerful than any pressed flower could ever be. Delilah lived another 5 years, spending her time with her family, still occasionally designing dresses, still telling the story of how a cowboy brought her living flowers and taught her to love again. When she died at 83, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about Quentin. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered. "Tell him I never stopped choosing life even when it was hard. Tell him the flowers are still blooming." She was buried beside her husband, and their children planted more wildflowers on the graves, so many that the cemetery became a riot of color every spring. The pressed flowers from those 17 funerals remained in Delilah's grandmother's Bible, preserved perfectly, a reminder of where she had been. But the living garden was her true legacy, a testament to the choice she made to love again, to live fully, to embrace hope even in the face of inevitable loss. The Quinn family continued to thrive, generation after generation, carrying forward the lessons Delilah and Quentin had taught. That grief was real and should be honored, but it should not become a prison. That love was always worth the risk. That living things, with all their imperfection and impermanence, were more precious than anything that could be pressed and preserved. That a cowboy with patience and wildflowers could heal a wounded heart, and together, two broken people could build something whole and beautiful and lasting. In Challis, Idaho, where it all began, the story of Delilah and Quentin became legend. People would point out the sites of their courtship: the cottonwood grove, the cemetery where they met, the hillside where he proposed. The dress shop still stood on Main Street, now run by a great-great-granddaughter who had inherited Delilah's talent for creating beauty. The Quinn ranch still raised horses, still trained them with patience and gentleness, still operated on the principles Quentin had established. And every spring, wildflowers still bloomed across the valley, carpets of purple and red and white spreading across the hillsides like living memory. Lupines and columbines and Indian paintbrush, growing wild and free, reaching toward the sun with roots deep in the good earth, blooming and fading and blooming again, year after year, generation after generation. Living flowers, living love, living proof that even in the hardest places, even after the deepest grief, beauty and hope and love could still flourish. The pressed flowers were beautiful in their way, preserved and perfect, a record of sorrow survived. But the living flowers were better. They changed and grew, they bloomed and faded, they seeded themselves and spread across the landscape, creating new beauty from old ground. They were imperfect and temporary and absolutely glorious, just like life itself, just like love itself, just like the story of a woman who collected funeral flowers until a cowboy showed her that living ones were worth the risk. And in the end, that made all the difference.